Okay, welcome to all. We're gonna start. So this initiative wants to create a sort of appointment for the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network Italy to discuss about the role of climate change for agriculture in a scientific manner. We have with us today a fellow colleague that is Daniele Bocchiola, professor at Politecnico di Milano. And together with him, we are gonna discuss properly which are the effects of climate change on agriculture. So without spending other words, I give the floor to Daniele to start. So Professor Bocchiola, the floor to you.
Yes, so thanks, Domenico, for inviting me to this initiative. So given that so far we are very few people, let's keep it very informal. And first of all, maybe you can introduce yourself to me. Maybe the person attending can tell us very quickly what's their line of job, what do they expect from the seminar in general, what they are interested in the field of agriculture and climate change. Also, in order to gather some information about this CSAYN network that I do not know and I'm very interested into knowing. So please tell me something about your work and etc. Can we start with Mrs. Astralaga?
Yes, hello. It seems my camera is not working. Let me see if I can get my camera. No, you cannot see me, no?
Yeah, now we see you.
Ah, okay. I don't see myself, but it's enough that you see me. Okay.
Fair enough, yeah.
So I'm the former director of the Environment, Climate, Gender and Social Inclusion division at IFAD. And right now I'm an independent advisor to several organizations on issues related to climate, environmental sustainability, gender empowerment, etc. And I'm also one of the directors of the board of CSAYN. So,
CSAYN, okay.
Yes.
So the right pronunciation, CSAYN.
Yes. So basically, this is the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network, which started a long time ago, and that I was fortunate enough to work with them very closely while I was in IFAD. And basically is trying to promote different ways to achieve climate smart agriculture for all the youth, rural youth around the world. It's very strong in Africa, but we have also chapters in Latin America, in Asia, and of course in Europe. So, and in North America as well, because we have members in the US and in Canada. So it's really a platform for the youth over the world to try to find ways to support this climate smart agriculture process. We have been very active in all the preparations for the food summit and very involved in the discussions in UNEP and UNEA, the United Nations Environment Program, as well as the climate change negotiations. So I hope that is enough to give you sort of a taste of who the network is and who I am. So I'm, of course, very interested in hearing your views about climate change and agriculture, which has been part of my job for 6 years. But it's always useful to hear other perspectives, and probably our perspective is not as scientific as your perspective, but it's very important for us also to hear that. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Oluok, how is that pronounced? Yeah,
Samson?
I think he left.
No, Samson, I don't know if you are there. Yeah,
He's busy.
Samson.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, Samson. Tell us something about you.
Are you getting me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Samson Watch from Kenya.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I'm coming from Kenya. I'm an activist in agriculture, and also I'm working with the community-based organizations around Homa Bay County in Kenya. We are basically specialized in smart agriculture, and that's bring a lot of agribusiness and agroforestry to foster and to fasten the strength of improving food security. I know being in this collaboration and this connection and also being here will enable me to learn a lot and also to gain something of my knowledge on smart agriculture and also in in agrobusiness. I'm the founder and the director of Bridges of Hope community-based organization that is registered in with the Ministry of Social Service. And also we are also working with the organizations that supports the county government to promote agricultural based activities within the county. I've been a friend for long to our brother Domenico, and we have done a lot, and I'm seeing there is a great future when we collaborate together. So I want to welcome all of us to Homa Bay County and also to Bridges of Hope. We see ways to promote the smart agriculture. In fact, one of our vision, if you look at the statistics today, you'll realize that the white collar job is no longer a help to our young ones and also to vulnerable and marginalized women. So if we promote agriculture, we will promote employment among the marginalized community and improve their life standard. So I'm very grateful, and I hope being here, I will learn a lot. Let me stop at that juncture for now, and I believe that we'll be talking.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Okosodo, right? Okosodo. I think he left.
Doctor, if you want to introduce yourself. Dr. Okosodo.
Well, not present at the moment.
We can let introduce Solange, Nadia, Murek.
Whom?
There is Solange, Nadia, Murek. Hi, so Nadia.
I don't see her.
If you want to introduce yourself, is yeah, on the lower part.
I see Jude Onemoleaze.
Also, yeah.
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 Hello. Nice to
Good
meet
afternoon,
you.
everybody.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Jude Onemoleaze. I'm a market system specialist, and I work across agriculture basically, with focus on aquaculture, poultry, general animal husbandry, and crop production. So I am the CEO of Durandel in Nigeria, and we'll be working extensively across the country. We've been around across 25 states of 36 states in Nigeria, trying to help farmers. Our focus currently is on aquaculture, trying to help farmers make that migration from the use of practices and would I use the word inputs, consumables that would impact on the environment and even on human health. So we've been largely introducing the use of or the adoption of probiotics in aquaculture operations, and that has significantly helped to reduce water and energy use by more than 80%, reduce incidences of mortality, high mortality rates, and generally improved practice of the farmer. And what we have seen happen is that margins have almost doubled for farmers who have adopted that practice. Cost of production has, gone down. We have seen a reduction in carbon footprint across those areas where adoption is actually taking place currently. And so that's what we have been doing. We hope to be able to escalate to other segments, like poultry, crop production, and animal husbandry. Currently, trials are on to see how we can help farmers across the country achieve this objective. Agriculture generally is site specific, it's location specific. So what we did was to create protocols that would enable farmers, a lot of them are artisanal farmers, to manage their practice in a way that is not too scientific. It's basically scientific, but not too, how will I use the word now? Their farmers are not generally educated. They are not, a lot of them are not able to communicate. We are unable to communicate with them like I am communicating with us. So we have to bring things to a very simple, how will I put it? Make it very simple for them to be able to adopt these practices. And we are seeing significant improvement in practice across those corridors where we have had our work. And we hope that as we keep up with our work, get much more funding, we will be able to escalate this across the remaining parts of the country and potentially all of Africa. So when I saw the notice for this meeting, I thought that it would be a good ground for me to contribute our work, especially as we have been on the field over the last 2 years. I'm currently in transit, moving around the country in spite of the security challenges and the likes, to be sure that why those of us in the academia will be able to do a lot of work that has to be done, that adoption takes place at the grassroots, which is key. If we don't have adoption at grassroots, all our work will just go down the drain. So that's our focus, to get technology, make them as simple as possible, and encourage and support the grassroots. Those are the grassroots, actors at the grassroots, artisanal farmers, smallholder farmers, to adopt this practice and get them to master it, to own the technology. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Murekatete, or Mrs. Murekatete.
I don't know, maybe she has some problem of connection and she cannot use the microphone.
Ah, here she is.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi. Maybe you can, if you can use the microphone, or you can write also in the chat if you want. We cannot hear you. Maybe in the meanwhile that Nadia is connecting or writing into the chat, you can go to Saki Narbello.
I think you see more people than I do here in the chat.
Yeah, you have to scroll down the participants.
Ah, okay.
Sakinar, I don't know if you're there, if you want to introduce yourself. or also Tebo George. Don't know if they are in the computer. Okay, maybe I suggest...
everybody is very shy today.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Let's see. Let's try to, I send you a request to unmute. So if you want to click on the unmute. Okay, Saki Narbello from Nigeria.
I can't unmute myself. So she has problem with the.
Yeah, I just send you a request for unmute, and eventually we can, in the meanwhile, Patrick Majinge, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey,
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, please, Patrick, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Patrick from Tanzania. I'm a director in voice basis on conservation issue, particularly in wildlife, and also on ecology situation in Tanzania, and climate issue based on agriculture and agriculture project activities. Thank you so much, Domenico. That is a few for me.
Thank you, Patrick. I don't know, Daniele, let me know if when you want to go ahead or if you want to make the...
So maybe we can start and maybe other people can introduce themselves maybe later or when we have a few moments for questions, okay? Basically, as Domenico invited me to participate to this meeting, I thought to present something about our activity here in Politecnico di Milano concerning climate change and agriculture. I'm not sure. I probably didn't take exactly the countries and application that you might be interested in, but anyway, I'm showing you our research and activity, and then maybe you can tell me whenever you find something of interesting, etc. By the way, I am we did not work either too in Africa in our research, or at least not specifically on agriculture, so I'm not very much of an expert, but I'm more expert, let's say, in about Italy and the Po Valley of Italy, which is a very big hotspot for agriculture. And then I will present you something also for Central Asia, which is Nepal and the Himalayas, which is a region where I've been visiting and working a little bit the last few years. And of course, I will present you something which is more related to our research activities. So something which is more at the research level, so with modeling, etc. But of course, this is my job, of course, as I work in the university, and still it might be a good basis for further development and discussion and also application. Okay, here you see a number of names. That is a number of persons, students, and professors, etc., that have been working with me more or less in the last 10 years or so. And so they also shared some research with me. I see here some disturbing, okay, labels, but I'm trying to go forward anyway. So first of all, I want to introduce, I think I don't know if I can remove these things. No. Domenico, tu sai come si fa a togliere questo affare qua?
Cosa vedi?
E io sulla mia diapositiva vedo la barra con le istruzioni, ma vorrei toglierla.
No, noi non la vediamo, vediamo
okay, so no problem. Okay, perfect. So I work in Politecnico di Milano. I'm an environmental engineer and I'm an associate professor since 2016. And my main activity is pursued within this under this umbrella of this climate lab. Climate lab is basically a laboratory of the Politecnico di Milano, a virtual laboratory in reality, because we have more computers, etc., and also some instruments and tools, etc., but we're not like a chemical lab or something. And we work over a broad scale, array of problems and things related to climate change. I'm inviting you, and I can probably try to do the trick here. If I click here on the link of the Climate Lab, let's see what happens. Okay, I'm basically opening up the page of the Climate Lab, which now you can see with me, and there are a number of links, of pages where you can go and you can see projects and theses that we offer, cooperation and network with other institutions, our publications, etc. So a lot of activity that we are pursuing under the umbrella of the Climate Lab, and this covers mostly items related to climate change. This Climate Lab is an interdepartmental lab, so it means that it is shared by 4 different departments in Politecnico di Milano. So there are different competencies involved, not only myself, but a number of scientists. So it might be of interest for you to give to make a quick scroll of the site and see what we do, and whatever you're interested in cooperation or information, you can of course contact me. We are also available on Facebook and Instagram, so you can also see on these social media. Basically, what you see here is a little bit of a sample of the very last setup of the lab. That is people working with me now. Some of them are very young people, which is PhD students or postdoc students, etc. Then we have Professor Renzo Rosso, who is a professor, I would say the chair of hydrology of Politecnico di Milano, which is the head of our school. And for instance, Professor Alberto Bianchi, who is working a lot in the mountain, etc. The group of work is called PolyHigh because we deal a lot, and we dealt a lot in the past with working with the research in the high altitude mountains of Italy, of the Andes, of South America, of the Himalaya, Pakistan, Nepal, etc. So we are very much interested in high altitude activity, so study of the water cycle in the high altitude, etc. And also we are interested in issues related to agriculture thereby, because as we will see, and of course as a basis for our work in the last few years, of course the issue of agriculture and crop production is of course largely related to water and climate. Well, here are a number of projects that we pursued in the last few years. For instance, just to make a few examples, this project here is called MAUPA, and it's related to mountain pastures, which is one thing that we study a lot. That is the impact of climate on the development of pastures in the mountain, for instance. And as you can see here in a number of names, we are working on some basins in Nepal, the Dudkosi Basin, and we will see something about this later on. We work in the Karakoram, in the Pakistani Karakoram, for instance. We also work, as you can see here, in Chile, which is on projects related to climate change and glaciers and water in South America and other situations. So the menu for today is as you see here, and you will notice that most of my work and slides and etc. are largely related to water, because I am an hydrologist. Basically, I work in the field of hydrology, and therefore my interest about agriculture is very much related to the interconnection, the strong interconnection between water and agriculture. So here you can see motivation and some part of the menu, and I will show you a couple of case study areas, which is rain-fed agriculture in Nepal and irrigated cropping in the Po Valley of Italy. Then I will tell you something about present situation of water availability for agriculture, because of course, as you surely know, and as everybody knows, agriculture has a lot to do with rainfall and water availability under the form of rainfall, or what they call rainwater footprint, and as well as it has a lot of implication, a lot of relation to irrigation, which is what they call blue water or stream water, which is water available in rivers or, for instance, in aquifers, etc. So I will say something about these two case studies. So here a quick resume or a quick bullet point of why climate change has an impact on agriculture. There are many facets here. One is the availability of water, which is precipitation and irrigation. Another one is the fact that under increasing temperature, under global warming, more water is necessary for cropping, and in general, one may expect more water consumption, but unfortunately less yield because of a number of reasons, including, for instance, thermal stress and others. Also, it is well known that climate change may increase the risk of pests, including weeds, parasites, and other type of problems with the agriculture. For instance, in my work, I'm not dealing with this bullet point number 7, but anyway, this is also very widely known problems. Another problem, of course, is with manuring, which is with fertilization. But in many cases, it can be assumed that fertilization is not strictly necessary, or anyway, is not a very limiting factor. However, in some cases, the availability of nitrogen, basically for manuring, may be also a problem. Now, an interesting facet is the point with complex topography, and we see something about this in Nepal, because complex topography implies complexity in agricultural practices, including, for instance, the very difficult or impossible use of machinery. That is, agriculture may only be done with human forces, with human workforces, or in cases with animal workforces, but not with machines. Well, this is one of the possibly very famous relatively recent papers in the field of assessment of future food security, I would say, under climate change. This is a very famous paper edited some 8 years ago in reality, but very actually updated at the present time, in fact, which is showing an assessment, a global assessment of the percentage change in yield between the present, that is 2013 at the time, and the half century. And as you can see, most of basically of the world is in red colors, implying an expected large decrease of yield in cereals worldwide at the half century. Of course, one thing that must be said is that global assessments are very useful for the purpose of general understanding and large-scale planning, for instance. But whenever one wants to gather a more accurate assessment and wants to be actually sure about relatively sure about the present situation and possibly the future, of course, more local studies need to be done. However, global studies like this one may highlight, actual hotspots for future problems and future trends of agriculture. In reality, when it comes to the problems of impact and interaction between hydrology, which is water availability, and the potential for croppings, probably the temperate regions are more a target, because in reality, in the equatorial to tropical areas, of course, the interplay between larger areas with large precipitation, or in some cases areas with very little precipitation, which is almost desert or very dry areas, of course, climate change is not impacting at a large extent. However, in temperate regions where in fact the temperature may actually move above a certain, let's say, critical threshold, and or precipitation may have a change with global warming in a positive or negative sense, and depending on the sense, of course, of the change, more or less water could be available. These areas may be particularly sensitive. I would like to illustrate with one slide the relationship basically between hydrology or water science or water engineering and basically, let's say, agriculture, and in general, the use of water for vegetation growth, including thereby crops and pastures and orchards, etc. So basically, the hydrological cycle in a given in a reference volume, as you can see here, which is a reference volume for let's say water budget, can be written in a quite complicated matter, in a quite complicated way, as you can see, in a quite complicated fashion in reality. However, if you choose wisely the reference volume or the control volume, and you choose wisely the period or the time frame where you basically describe the water budget, you can write it down in a much simpler way. And if you really strip down the water budget equation, you can come up with something very simple as here, which is P, which is total precipitation, equates basically the sum of stream flow, which we call Q here, which is the water going away within a river, and what we call AET, and A is for actual evapotranspiration, which is the real amount of water which is used within the which is stored in the soil and then used by vegetation for their vital cycle, and evapotranspiration, which is a biomass growth and then release of water in the atmosphere under the form of water vapor. This is more suitable, in fact, for what we think is rain-fed or grows based on rain. So basically rain-fed agriculture. And we know that when it comes to consideration of irrigated crops or irrigated agriculture, of course, this becomes more complicated because Q here, which is the discharge, may still be taken and go back in a feedback, in a sense, within the input in the form of, let's say artificial precipitation. Okay. Anyway, it's very clear that within the hydrological budget, one term, which is the one with evapotranspiration, is basically the linkage, the linking point with the vegetation. So and cropping. So in one sense, we could say that if you use such a water budget or hydrological approach, and you describe these evapotranspiration terms accurately enough, in order that within these terms you consider the growth of vegetation or crops or pasture or whatever type of green organism, basically green living organism, and the consumption of water thereby, you can basically come up with an estimate of water consumption and crop growth or crop yield for that specific plants or type of vegetation. And so this is the reason why, in a sense, hydrology and agronomy and agricultural modeling are very much interconnected, at least from a modelistic point of view. Sorry. So I will not claim that engineers and water engineers know a lot about agronomy and plants physiology and phenology, etc. But still, I can claim that they might know enough about modeling of water budget and interaction between water and vegetation in order to be able to describe the behavior of vegetation in terms of interaction with the water cycle. Another interesting point here is the fact that, well, and you know that already because you all follow and know well. I'm just seeing some. Okay, no, I just see some interaction in the chats. As you know well, it is possible to create models of the atmosphere, which are called general circulation model or regional circulation model, or anyway, models of the atmosphere at the global or regional scale. And these can basically provide forcing of climate here in the past, or especially of interest in the future, which is called the climate projection. And this climate projection can be used to force hydrological and agronomic model and to provide scenarios of future behavior of vegetation and especially crops for agricultural assessment purposes. Of course, this is not prediction or forecast because this is not deterministic assessment, but it is projection, meaning that you provide basically an array of possible scenarios, which is like a big fork, like some trajectories with a certain spread, providing possible evolution of the future. And here you have many examples. For instance, you can provide some potential future path of radiative forcing. And well, here we're talking about 2500 centuries after in the future, but we are not interested in so long trajectories. Normally we fix ourselves, we stop ourselves here at the end of 21 centuries, and depending on different potential trajectories of radiative forcing, what is called RCPs, and RCPs are related to assessment report number 5. Now assessment report number 6 has been edited and delivered, and other different concepts are used, which they call SSPs, but never mind, it is more or less the same concept. In fact, depending on the intensity of the radiative forcing for the future, basically you have different potential trajectories of a number of, let's say, meteorologic and general atmospheric variables. Here, for instance, you have global temperatures, surface temperatures, going from the most optimistic scenarios here, which would be, well, the Paris Agreement, basically scenario, which is with respect to the Paris Agreement commitments, all the way up to these business as usual scenarios, as this is called, which is with very large increase of temperature and very little effort for mitigation. Here you have, for instance, increase of the sea level, for instance, and here you have increases of a number of GHGs, which is greenhouse gases, as you of course know better. Okay, so using these scenarios, it is possible to assess even future scenarios of agricultural productivity. Basically, I want to display here one example, which comes from a study we recently did. Focusing on the Nepali Himalaya. The reason why I'm focusing on this particular country is because basically I have been visiting this country a number of times in the last few years, especially within activities and projects related to high altitude hydrology assessment with a committee called AVK2CNR, which is a committee basically devoted to research in high altitude, and I could visit Nepal the last few years 4 or 5 times, and I could do the Everest trek a couple of times, and we did a lot of measurements in the glaciers of the area, etc. But we were also able to visit the let's say the lowlands, so to speak, and when we say lowlands here, we're still talking 2000 meter or even 3000 meter, where of course agriculture is pursued, is practiced at this very high altitude, and we were interested in studying what would be the trade-off between climate change and the impact on agriculture in this area, which is basically almost entirely rain-fed, or very anyway largely rain-fed. Well, of course, the Terai area, which is the lowland area of Nepal, is irrigated, but the high altitude area in the mountain of Himalaya, of course, is rain-fed for a number of reasons, most notably the very complex topography. Still, agriculture in Nepal implies a very large workforce. So it is basically the main activity of a very large share of the local population. So we were interested basically in assessing what would be the trade-off between climate change, increase in temperature, changes in the phenology and phenology of crops and crop yield, and the chance of moving upward in the mountain in order to provide croppings at higher altitude, and thereby trying to mitigate the effect of climate change, and what would be also the physical limit for that. In the literature, you can find some contribution. Here you have an example of one paper that I wrote some time ago related to food security in Nepal, but there are also other articles where you may deepen into the topic, and you can find it in the literature, and they are presented at the end of the presentation. Okay, but anyway, if you Google my name on ResearchGate or any other social media or website for research, you will be able to find all of these contributions. The focus here was in this Dudh-Kosi area. We also studied another catchment, which is called the Indrawati catchment, which is western of the Dudh-Kosi, and also you can find reference for it in the literature. And there, it's a lower catchment in general, so it doesn't reach very high altitude like the one here. The one here I'm studying, I'm presenting here, is what is the so-called Dudh-Kosi. Dudh in Nepali language means milk. So Dudh-Kosi means basically the milk river. Name of the river becomes from the color, which is very whitish and milkish, mostly because of the large content of glacial silt coming from erosion as due to large glacial melting. This is a very iconic basin because on the east side of it, on the east relief, you can find the Everest mountain, or Chomolungma, or anyway, or anyway the mountain, the highest mountain, the tallest mountain in the world, okay, as it's called in Nepal. Another 8,000 meters. Nuptse and Lhotse are both 8,000 meters mountain. Okay, this is the glacier you see here is the very iconic Khumbu Glacier, and we studied the behavior of this glacier, and this is especially important in order to understand the very complex hydrology of these catchments, because hydrology and water availability is strongly impacting water availability for agriculture, both rain-fed and irrigated, even though irrigated agriculture here is very seldom, very little. But still compression of the climate of this area and hydrology, including high altitude hydrology of snow and melting of glacier, etc., is very important. And you will find information of it in the paper, as I mentioned. A very iconic installation within this catchment, it's what is called the AVK2CNR Pyramid Lab. This is the Pyramid Lab. This is the mountain called Pumori Mountain. And this is what they call the shelter. The shelter is basically a number of small lodges, small rooms where one can stay and dwell during the period is at the Pyramid Lab. And the Pyramid Lab is largely and extensively used for studies in many fields of science. And this includes medicine, physiology, limnology for high altitude lakes, hydrology, glaciology, you name it. And it's a very widely famous excellence of Italian research in the world, basically. And it is managed by the AVK2CNR committee, of which I am an associate, by the way. This glacier here is called the Lobuche Glacier. And by the way, water from melting of this Lobuche Glacier is used with a small turbine, which is also producing some electricity. And the whole energy feeding of the lab is basically relying upon solar panels, as you can see here, and some hydro turbines taking glacier melt basically in streams. And there is one whole room of this shelter here, which is entirely filled with batteries. Batteries used to accumulate the solar power, basically. One result of it is that it's quite a cold place, because of course it's very difficult to warm it, especially during winter, because they also do some winter activity, even though most of the activity is during summer and monsoon season. But still, it's quite a cold place. Anyway, it's a very clean and sustainable energy-wise, of course. You can find a lot of information if you look on the website of the AVK2CNR group and association. Okay, we are very interested in study of the area, and we developed this study focusing on the Dudh-Kosi catchment related. Well, you can see the title here, basically related to agriculture productivity and food security. We mixed here a number of tools and methods in order to be able to quantify, for instance, in this area, what is the agricultural cover, what would be the agricultural yield, type of crops, etc. And then we were able to provide an assessment of the agricultural productivity in the catchment, absolutely rain-fed, almost 100% rain-fed, and even to project forward in the future the productivity as related to climate change and the dependence on altitude and potential for altitudinal occupation, as we will see. First of all, I want to show you some pictures because the landscape in this place is incredible. In fact, if you ever happen to do the Everest trek, which is basically the trek, the path which in 1 week more or less brings you from let's say 2,800 meters or so in Lukla, which is the point of start of the trekking. Lukla is a very famous place also because you reach it with a very small airplane, and the situation is very scary actually. Then you start walking, and in 1 week more or less you would be in this area here, which is in the lowest figure in the picture at the altitude of 5,300 meters, but even higher than that. You can even reach 6,000 meters or so. And well, this is for tourists. Of course, higher altitude than that are of course for professional, those basically climbing Everest and other mountains. Here you can see what is incredible for me, which are 3,600 meters above the sea level. You have, well, Namche Bazaar. Namche Bazaar is a bazaar indeed, because you can buy everything. I mean, if you go there, if you reach Namche Bazaar only with a swimming suit or with a swimming trunk, in fact, you can buy whatever is necessary to climb the Everest. You can buy shoes, you can buy wind jackets, harnesses, ropes, whatever is necessary in order to climb the Everest. So indeed the name of bazaar is very well attached. But what is very interesting for me is that you have, as you can see, very many terraces where agriculture is still pursued. And in this area here, they also have some irrigation system. Most of what they crop here is maize. Probably the yield is not very high, but anyway, it is actually incredible that at such altitude, you still have the capability of basically cropping cereals, which means that here the climate situation is very peculiar. In fact, it's also very peculiar because you find the first glaciarized areas above 1,500 meters. This picture here is just taken I would say in the backyard of the Pyramid Lab. It's very few meters away because the pyramid is in reality at this altitude here, and this is still the Mount Pomori that you could see. This is a frozen lake, and it is frozen until May. After May to September, October, this is not frozen anyway, and it's actually liquid water. This is to say that glaciers are a very high altitude, meaning that in spite of the very high altitude here, the temperature is relatively high anyway. Okay, so ice is not permanently found below, sorry, if not until this altitude. Okay, all the way up to 4,000 meters, which is 4,000 meters, 4 kilometers in altitude, you have very nice trees of rhododendron. This is called Laliguras, and this is the national tree of Nepal, and it's basically growing up all the way up to 4 kilometers in altitude. Laliguras, you can find it on the internet. I can maybe show you if I'm very rapid here in Googling it. Yeah, I think, well, it's actually here. Yeah, is this flower here? I think it's a type of rhododendron, and it's a very typical flower in the mountain of Nepal, and I think it's the national tree of Nepal, Laliguras. Okay, so here you have some information in the catchment. Again, sorry, I need to remove this or whatever. It's some mess here with the, okay, sorry. Well, here you can see already some information. As you can see, all of these red dots are basically cropped areas, which is areas where crops are cultivated. And as you can see here, there are a number of spots going upward in the valley, all the way up to the highest altitude. Here, I would say that we are 4,000 meters or so, which is 4 kilometers or so. Okay, then we will see a little bit better, the different types of cereals. However, a lot of maize is cropped here. We did some preliminary studies that are referenced here with a number of PhD students and master students, etc. And we studied, for instance, trends of population growth in the area. And you can see in the population in this particular catchment, which is expected to reach more than 500,000 at the end of the century in these 3 districts, Solokhumbu, Kaldunga, Kotang, and Udayapur. And the catchment is mostly in Solokhumbu and Kotang catchment. Solokhumbu is basically one very large district, administrative district of Nepal. And we are very close to Kathmandu. I would say no more than 30 kilometers from Kathmandu, actually. We found a number of interesting things. Basically, in the last 20 or 30 years now, in reality, there was a large increase of population. And of course, with population came a large increase of croplands, which is the area cover for cropland. However, we found out that a number of drivers, including climate and topography, and also network, was basically seen as a limiting factor, which is by doing some correlation study, we found out that basically the areas that could be used for cropland were areas within a limited distance from the network of roads or of tracks, where the slope was below a certain value, I think in the order of 15-20 degrees, because a steeper patch, steeper plots could not be cropped. And then, of course, altitude, that is above a given altitude, there was basically very little cropland. However, why was this interesting? Because we use this type of relationship, this type of drivers, in order to assess projection of the future occupation for cropland in the catchment, which is we try to understand under future climate, which is with increasing temperature and maybe potentially decreasing precipitation, at least according to some models, what would be the behavior of the ever-increasing population in the valley, which is where the population would basically use new areas in order to colonize and create croplands. There are a number of papers that you can find on the internet specifically on this topic, not made by us, but made by other scientists in Nepal, and they studied what the type of climate and topographic drivers would be basically limiting factors for cropland growth under the growth of population. So, well, I won't linger too much here. We needed several types of data: temperature, precipitation, radiation. Radiation is very high in this area, for instance, because it's very high altitude. Knowledge of information of the type of soil, and then topographic, land use information, etc. And also some data of crop yield. And we were able to find some information of crop yield in the area, well, especially from ICIMOD. ICIMOD, well, you can look on the internet, is a very large research center based in Kathmandu in reality, and I visited that plenty of times in reality, and they gather governments governments from I think 7 countries in the Himalayas, including Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, India, and others. And they have basically created a research center especially devoted to development of the mountains and the rural people and the rural countries in the mountains. So they do a very good job, and they provide a very large amount of information. Very interesting thing, for instance, is the development of precipitation in the altitude. You can see this very strange profile, which is here we have the altitude all the way up to 5,500 meters or so, and precipitation here. And we have found out that this is the type of behavior that one would expect, which is vertically increasing precipitation all the way up to 2 kilometers or so, and then largely decreasing. And this is very clear because at very high altitude, there is very dry air. So air with very little moisture and very little precipitation. This is also very important because whenever cropping, whenever agriculture would be attempted at altitude where little water is available, of course, this would be less rewarding. So probably an optimal area, an optimal zone for croppings in terms of available precipitation would be somewhere here, okay, in the order of 2 kilometers or so, not much higher than that, because of course, little precipitation would be available. And also above a certain altitude, which is, I would say, 4 kilometers or so, most of precipitation is under snow form, and maybe not permanent snow, but largely snow form in time. Okay, so using a mixture of information from satellite data and calendar dates of different periods of flowering and harvesting for different cereals, we were able to build this map, which provides the areas of croppings with different type of cereals. And it turned out that maize is taking the lion's share, largely in reality, but even wheat and rice are cropped in the area. Apparently, maize is the most adaptive, or the best adapted cereal in the area. Also, it is known that in this catchment, as in many mountain catchment of Nepal and Himalaya, a lot of poultry is pursued, which is they breed chickens for eating and for selling at the market, especially in Kathmandu and in other areas. And poultry is basically fed with maize. So maize is very much used and cropped. Well, I will skip this. This is what we call the Polycrop model, which is our model for providing, let's say, crop growth. This is the hydrological part, but again, I don't want to bother you too much. The only thing that I want to say is that we can simulate the flowering and growing and then harvesting, which is called harvest and kill, which is basically means that the crops are sowed, and then at some point they are harvested and cut, and then you start back again, basically. And this is all. It is all basically governed or linked to temperature cycle. So plant phenology is basically modeled according to what we call the degree day. Degree day is a very simple method, probably not perfect to describe the actual behavior of plants, because there's also response to radiation and other factors. But anyway, degree day provide, let's say, good agreement with observation. So basically, depending on the temperature and the accumulation time of certain temperature, you have growth. The only thing to be noticed is that we have a cutoff temperature, and cutoff temperature is basically a stress temperature above which growth is slowed down. So whenever cutoff temperature is exceeded for a long period, basically the cereal grows much slower. Okay, so at the end of the season, you could have basically a loss of biomass, so a loss of yield. Okay. And then the model provides information about Lie and Guy. Basically, these are indexes of the area covered with leaves, etc. So basically, it provides a measure of the spatial occupation of the cereal. Well, the crop growth model again is quite complex. There are very many items to be calculated. For instance, evapotranspiration is taken into account, so potential for evapotranspiration related to temperature, radiation, etc. Also, CO2 is taken into account, which is depending on the different scenarios of climate from the IPCC, we have different types of concentration of CO2, and depending on the more or less CO2, different crop growth is attained. Then it really depends on the plant behavior. Some plants are more sensitive to CO2, others are less, okay? Eventually, what is estimated is a productivity or yield, which is in tons per hectare, okay? Oh, this is again only to give a sense of the complexity of the model, which is there are very many parameters, and not all of them are very simple. But anyway, not all of them are simple to be defined. But anyway, some sensitivity analysis and educated guess may help in refining. Here is for wheat, rice, and maize. Grano is wheat. Sorry, some words remain in Italian. Sorry. Okay. So what is this that I'm showing you here is basically the estimated yield. Here on the top left, we have wheat. On the top right, we have rice. And the bottom left, we have maize. And what you see here, well, let alone the bars here upside down, look only at the lines here. The model basically provides a certain estimate of annual yield in terms of tons per hectare, and this is the red line here for a number of years. And basically, you should look at this line here, this dashed line here, which would be the actual estimate productivity. The two lines here I would say brown and green are different estimate of yield for Solokhumbu district and Kotang district, and we made a spatial average. Well, what you can see here is that besides some noise, of course, the model in red is more or less able to represent the estimated yield in dashed. The point with model validation and model calibration and validation is very critical and complex, and we will discuss a little bit about this later on when we presented the Italian case study where more control is possible. But in many situations, like here in Nepal, which is in a less, let's say, monitored situation, or in a developing country like here, information of the actual behavior of local patches of crops and of the actual yield, etc., usable to validate models, it's quite a complex situation. It's quite a complex issue. So model calibration and validation must be made, of course, with knowledge, with the understanding of the potential presence of noise, of course, and inaccuracy. So we did some studies, and it turned out that for different types of cereals, and we will focus, for instance, on maize here, which is covering a lot of the croplands of this catchment, it can be projected to the future, which is for 250, for 2100, which is the end of the century, the share of area in the catchment used for maize crops. And as you can see here at 2050, which is a half century, we have the maximum expected area coverage, which is in response, as you can see here on the right, upside down, an estimate of population at that time. The trends provided by the United Nations of population of Nepal that have been downscaled to Kumbi provides what you see here in the picture. So at half centuries, 250 or something, 250,000 people living in the catchment, and then at the end of the century, 210. So they already project towards the end of the century even a slight decrease of population. And again, this is information provided by the United Nations. So we didn't do the projection, basically. However, we provided a model which, in response to the population change, provides also an estimate of the area of croplands at different altitude. And here in the different colors, you can see the different altitude. And you can see here, for instance, that at the end of the century, sorry, at half century, in the altitude belt from 1500 to 2000 meters, you could have 34% of the area or so cropped with maize, for instance, and so on with different altitude belts. Okay, why is this of interest? Because this is a model which links the increase of population in the area to the fact that population will occupy areas at increasing altitude to be able to crop different cereals, and here specifically for maize. Again, as limited by increasing slope at the high altitude, and limited by distance from the network, the present network of the streets. Okay, so the chosen areas will be the closest as possible to connection network, which is to roads and tracks into the catchment. At the low altitude, these roads may be car roads or bike roads. At the highest altitude, these roads will only be walking roads, okay, walking tracks. Then we used some projection of future climate, which you can see here. And the interesting thing here is that every different model, ECR, ACAM6, and CCSN4, these are all models under the assessment report 5 of the IPCC. They all cover different grid cells and they have a different footprint over the catchment. So we had to compose, of course, all of these models. And however, each model was taken under 3 different scenarios, 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5, which is from very optimistic to very pessimistic. And here you can see the corresponding increase in temperature on average. Okay. So what we see from these apparently complicated but somewhat meaningful charts. Have a look at maize, for instance. Okay. What you see here in this dotted line here is the present area cropped with maize. Okay. And if you look at the right the left y-axis, you see the area dedicated to the crops in square kilometer divided by 10. So here, for instance, 6 would be, well, almost 7 would be 70 square kilometer cropped with maize. 4 altitude belts, see? This dashed line here instead is the expected cropping areas for maize at 2050. As you can see, it has almost doubled. Okay. What you see here with the red line instead, the red dashed line, is the total area of the basin. Okay, represented here on the left, sorry, on the right y-axis upside down. Okay, so basically, a large area of the catchment is between 2,500 and 3,000. And a very large share of the catchment will be colonized for maize production in an area between 1,500 and 2,000 meters. Okay. What you see here instead, in the color lines here below, is in black the present productivity of maize at different altitudes. While in the many colors here, each one reported here with a model and a scenario, so ECAM 4.5, ECAM 2.6, etc., is the future productivity of maize at different altitude. What one can see of interesting here is that under even the present scenarios and even more under the future scenarios, the productivity of maize would be very high, let's say at its maximum, from 2,000 meters all the way up to 3,000 meters or so. But apparently, most of the cultivated area, of the cropped area, is much below. So apparently there is a mismatch between the present situation for croplands, especially for maize and then also for wheat, as you can see here, and even for rice, but rice is very little cropped in reality. There is a mismatch between the altitude of the croplands and the potential productivity. So apparently, from our research, it turns out that with climate change, at the growing altitude, there will be capability for large croplands, for large increase of croplands, especially for maize, which is very much represented and cropped in the area. But unfortunately, for a number of reasons related to topography and climate, and also probably objective problems with living at very high altitude, even for people in the area, which are very well acquainted to high altitude, or should be, there is basically a mismatch between the most used area, the most cropped areas, and the potential for cropping. And this is very, I would say, eclatant, I would say very striking for wheat. Apparently, wheat has a maximum area of productivity at this high altitude here, which is 2,700 or so meters, but in reality, it's cropped almost 2 kilometers below that. Okay, so the bring home message is, in some situation in very high altitude areas, there are some objective problems in cropping or developing croplands at high altitude, where instead potentially the productivity would be quite high, especially under climate change, because under climate change at the highest altitude, temperature would increase, so you would basically have a plus, while instead at the lowest altitude, increase of temperature would result into thermal stress. So in fact, the productivity of crops at low altitude would be quite low, okay? So basically the problem would be too high quite high or very high would be good for the crops in some sense, but is not good enough for the people, or it's very difficult to conquer, okay? As a result, we made a simulation. We calculated this index here, which is C%, which is the ratio between the calories potentially produced within the catchment, and CN, which is the need of calories for the local population, with basically an assumption of daily caloric need in the order of 2,500 calories per day. Okay. So presently, if you look at the present value of the C percentage index, this would be in the order of 110%. So this would be fulfilled 110%. Okay. In the future, in reality, at the out centuries, under each of the scenarios, the calculated C percentage plus would always be smaller than 100%. For two reasons, basically. If you look at the void bars here, only the green bars without lines, you have basically thermal stress reducing a lot the cereal croppings, especially at the low altitude. And if you look at the full bars, which is with the horizontal black lines, this is the same index calculated with, including basically what we call ML, which is basically the, let's say, modified land use, which is adaptation with occupation of high altitude for crops. But even in that case, the value would be below 100%. So basically you have increase of thermal stress, which provides less crops, and let's say very difficult or relatively little potential for colonization of high altitude areas, which then provides some mitigation, but does not provide full mitigation. That is the present degree of fulfillment could not be reached. Also for the projected increase of population, okay? And the red bars are the same thing, of course, to be read upside down on the right for the end of the century. Okay. Well, this is another chart, but we don't want to bother a lot. But anyway, again, the percentage, the C percentage would be lower than 100% at the end of the century. I guess you're tired or you have questions, so we can stop maybe for one moment, or are we running out of time, Domenico?
No, we are not running out of time, but I think that maybe we can stop for questions or like consideration also for the audience. So I'll take the chance to eventually ask if there are questions. So, I mean, we know that these are very scientific.
I understand
scientific data. That I like it, but I think that is important.
Well, if I could say, if I could wrap up very quickly, again, that is by skipping the scientific jargon, the idea is that climate change is basically striking the capability of providing rain-fed agriculture. One could move at higher altitude in order to make up, but there are physical problems that basically hamper this possibility because the mountains are like cones. So the higher you go, the available area is the smaller and the steeper. Okay, so you can make up until a certain point, but you cannot make up fully, especially under population growth, strong population growth.
Yeah, I think that this is like a very important tip that you use for summarizing the message, and I think it's very important also for practicing agriculture. A lot of us here in the call are really also practicing agriculture, and having such an information also on the practical effects onto the application of agriculture is very important. And on that, I reinforce the question for the audience. If you have also questions, now we understand a little bit which are the effects and what does the climate change physically implies for agricultural practices. Standing to that, we'll ask the audience if there are also questions on that, also the practice of agriculture. I have one, but
well, I see some comments here.
Yeah.
Yeah, share your email. Well, my email is quite easy. Actually, it's name.surname@polimi.it, so you can find me very easily. Here we have a question by Margarita, maybe.
Yeah, no, Margarita was saying that she was leaving and yeah, just she will follow up. But what I want to ask to you, Daniele, one question that also we can like address for all. So regarding the productivity, we understand that actually climate change is affecting productivities of the crops and so on. So also at the farmer level, which kind of strategies we can like consider for like cope with this problem of productivity? We know that also there are differences in responses of productivities, but for example, the planning standing to that is a problem for most of us.
Well, of course, farmers are adapting to climate and climate change, ever since the dawn of the world, I would say, because of course, locally, educated knowledge and educated guess is very active and efficient. So for instance, I would say that the cropping season is very important. Here we imagine a standard cropping season, which is you sow in a certain period and then you harvest at maturity, etc. But then you can anticipate or delay, for instance, the the moment of sowing or the cropping season anyway. In the mountain, of course, you would have to do so because you also have a different period with no cover, etc., which is always affecting. And then, of course, you can do it also in the lowlands, of course, because even in the lowlands, you may have a chilly period or warmest period, etc. Then here we imagine some how can I say, ideal type of crop with certain parameters, which is the degree day, etc. But in reality, there are manifold types of crops with different properties, and everybody and every farmer knows perfectly what would be the cultivar or the type of cereal that is best suitable for their area. Then, of course, use of water and irrigation, or even support irrigation whenever necessary, could help a lot, because, for instance, dry periods would be basically dampened with use of little water, for instance, to have a least amount of soil moisture, etc. So, of course, there are very many adaptation measures that could be done. Of course, the study I made, it's to represent some general trends in the area, of course, but locally, very many type of adaptation could be used.
Thank you, Daniele. Samson was asking to you if do you think that there is the possibility to extend your project to other areas, your studies, or to other areas?
Yeah, of course. Well, for instance, I will show you some concepts related to the Po Valley of Italy, which is agriculture in the lowlands of Italy with irrigated, in this case, irrigated areas, because irrigation makes some difference in reality. We have studied already something, for instance, related to pastures in the mountain. We have studied pastures and croplands in Pakistan, for instance. So in principle, the good thing with physically based model is that they could be extended to different areas whenever proper parameterization is possible. So of course, we would be interested into studying other cases worldwide, of course. Again, these models are general enough that they can be used in different areas. We didn't work extensively, for instance, in Africa until so far, but to say one instance, we have worked in Ethiopia on hydrological budget, etc. And we have already a lot of models, hydrological models set up for the area of Ethiopia. And we could use this also for cropping, etc. We are working now in Egypt, for instance, with the water budget of the Nile River, and likewise, we could work in the area, but in general, provided that some climate data and crop data are available, these models can be parameterized largely and used, of course.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that Samson, if you want also to speak out, please open the microphone.
Actually, that is what I was trying to ask. If thank you for answering, because I realized that the kind of projects that he's doing in agriculture, and that is what we also carrying out and doing in Bridges of Hope, as you are aware, Domenico. So I was like maybe interested, if at all, this project that he's doing can be extended, especially to African countries. But basically, with us, we are more of focusing on marginalized areas, marginalized people, vulnerable, and mostly youths and women. Those are the people that we are intending to work with, because there are people who are left behind. So basically, I was having an interest on it, and maybe to see if at all we can have a collaboration that will allow all of us to work together, and maybe for this project to be started, especially in Kenya, where I'm coming from, and maybe to other places in Africa. So that was my main question. Otherwise, Daniele, I'm very glad learn what you are doing. That is so good.
Yeah, well, Samson, thanks a lot for your compliments. Well, of course, I would be interested in cooperating. Of course, I am a scientist. I mean, I work on models, etc. However, I'm very glad, I'm very content when, of course, such models can be used for specific sites and possibly provide some knowledge and maybe some foresight of the future. Because it is true that sometimes science is cryptic and it takes a lot in order to apply scientific concepts into the real world, but still science provides us some foresight of the future and some pathways that we can prefer, you know, where we can move towards and maybe leave other tracks alone. So it can give us some potential for informed choice, so to speak. So of course I am amenable and willing to cooperate and help, of course. Thank you.
There is something
Maybe for the last question, maybe to allow others also to ask questions. How do you intend to get funding for this project to run?
In reality, there are many possible funding sources. There are some joint projects, for instance, between Europe and Africa in the, say, H2020 projects or Prima projects or others that are specifically intended for cooperation in the field of agriculture, water resource management, etc., between Europe and Africa. And however, I would say that from my point of view, many case studies that I pursued were not strictly related to large projects with a lot of funding. I did them basically because I was interested and with a minimal amount of funding in order, for instance, to have some traveling or to pay maybe one dedicated person to the projects, I was able to realize many of these studies. So it's not that behind each of our studies and our article, there is a very big funded project. In some cases, if I'm willing to cooperate, I mean, even with a limited amount of money, that's still possible, of course.
Yeah,
these are curiosity-driven projects. Of course, not always you need, very big funding.
Yeah, I very agree on the approach of Daniele, but I think that Samson, if there is the interest, we can eventually bridge and create connection on that.
Absolutely.
I saw Sakinar, yeah, thank you for the appreciation. I don't know if you want to speak out, Sakinar, if you want to also. Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening from Nigeria, and good day, everyone. It was actually a wonderful session. It was explicit, and I want to commend Danielle for giving all of the insight from the projection and also all of the scientific reference to all of it. It's quite interesting. And I see it's something that we have to keep engaging more of the young people, especially the academic institution where we have more of young people, where they can just, in Nigeria, we have a curriculum that you have to do a project. So where projects can be aligned into the reality, not just the paperwork and then it will be dumped. And that paper is going to really work with the grassroots to bring up this data, which would actually inform decisions and programming, especially for climate change, for agricultural intervention. It is a wonderful one, and I hope that we keep communicating on that. I am a member of the YUNGO, that is the Young UNFCCC Youth Network. I'm a member of the Science and Technology Group, so we would love to have you in subsequent meeting that we're doing, if you could actually grant us that, so I could facilitate that. Sorry, I'm having a baby around here. So if I could facilitate that so that we can have you, so that it could be a kind of capacity building for young people to see the need, why they have to integrate the reality into the paperwork they're doing, so that their project will be something of reference. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dominica, for bringing up this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe Sakina, you can leave the email in the chat. I don't know if you already left, and Daniele, if you agree, I can bridge to Sakina also.
Yeah. Well, I think you can diffuse my email, but I think it's very easy to find on the internet, so no problem at all.
Okay.
Okay, so you tired enough that we can stop, or we can move forward a little bit? You tell me.
Let's move.
Well, I will try maybe to make the long story short. I just want to show you some information about Italy, because Italy is also, let's say, an amenable place to suffer the impact from climate change. And in reality, probably the most important or the area with most relevant croppings, especially of rice and maize, which are very famous product of Italy, because rice is very diffused in Italy. We have a lot of typical dishes with rice, etc., especially in northern Italy. And maize is also very important, not because it's very much eaten by people, even though we have a very famous polenta. Polenta is made with maize, but the problem is that maize is used to feed animals, and especially cows, basically. And this is a base for all the chain production for a number of products, including cow flesh, and including milk, and including cheese, etc. So it's a very important product. However, all of these are very large water consumer, and especially maize and rice use a lot of water. The picture you see here, for instance, is a rice pad, which is an area entirely flooded with water. And water is very necessary because it provides thermal compensation to water, to avoid thermal stress. And also it avoids intervention from pests and parasites, etc. So it keeps rice protected, especially at the beginning of the growing cycle, which is of the growing season. As I told you before, it was possible in Italy, for instance, with our group, to provide some field experiments, and specifically we worked in this place called Livraga. Livraga is southern of Milano. Milano, by the way, is basically here, somewhere here, so it's very close to my hometown and Domenico's hometown, Milano. And we could do some studies, including, for instance, as you can see here, with this very large tower, and we were able to measure a number of parameters. And one very interesting, for instance, is evapotranspiration, which is we were able to quantify the amount of water vapor moving away from the field and then reaching the atmosphere. And this is a very interesting parameter, because, as you know, evapotranspiration is basically used to parameterize crop growth, etc. And then we were also able to measure soil moisture and other things to set up a model able to represent crop growth. Then we also work in Persico d'Osimo, which is another place where we were able to make some simulation, and I will show you even here in Italy the potential impact of climate change. What is interesting here in the Po Valley of Italy is that, given the large amount of croppings that we do, and that is the larger quantities of cereals we produce, we use a lot of water. In the Po Valley of Italy, 90% of the water for civil use is, of course, used for cropping, for agriculture. And sometimes this is also competitive use, because water comes from the mountain of northern Italy. So there is a connection between the mountain and the lowlands. And water is also used for hydropower production along the way. And it's also used for civil purposes, which is for drinking purposes. And then it's also necessary to leave some water into the rivers for ecological purposes. So, of course, when you withdraw water, basically, for agriculture, you always need to compete with other use of water. So this is a competitive action. And even though in the Po Valley of Italy there is a lot of water, and also a lot of water in the aquifers, because we have very large aquifers under the surface of the Po Valley, still given the large amount of water we use for agriculture, we are a potential risk for future agriculture. Here is a picture of the Livraga station, and here you have represented all of the very nice instruments that were used. Also, the crop ate was measured manually. The mice ate. So how tall is a mice tree, a mice plant, etc., and corn cobbles, etc. Then we also took some images with the satellites of LEI, which is a leaf area index, which is useful also to validate the model. And what you can see here, very interesting in my opinion, is the map, for instance, for evapotranspiration for 3 years, basically. And as you can see, the observed evapotranspiration, which is these dots, and this was done basically with what they call the eddy correlation method and gas analyzer. So basically, you calculate the vertical flux velocity, and then you calculate the amount of moisture into air, and you make the product of the air flux times the soil moisture, the air moisture concentration, the water vapor, and then you come up with an assessment of evapotranspiration. And the very interesting thing is that the Polycrop model and the CropSys model also, which is a very, very famous model that everybody uses worldwide, which can simulate at the daily scale the cropped growth. Basically, they provided very similar behavior, and basically they matched the measurements. So this is important because, as I told you before, model validation is very necessary, and you need to make it in a controlled environment. And this tower that you see there, I think were costed in the order of 200 kilo euros something, putting together all of the instruments thereby. So it is very expensive, but it is also very important because you can parameterize model, and when the model works in a very controlled environment, also the lab scale environment, you can then apply into unmeasured place or situation where you cannot do proper accurate measurements. Here is the same thing, which is theta, which is the soil moisture. Well, observation of soil moisture were made with this the time domain reflectometry probes with the dots, and this is the corresponding behavior in terms of models. Also surprising to me, because normally soil moisture is very complicated to assess. This is the growth, crop growth. Of course, unfortunately, here we didn't have basically daily measurements of maize plants, 8, but we had an average over the 3 years. But however, we came up with good assessment. And these are images of leaf area coverage obtained with the MODIS satellite, also matched very well by the model. By the way, we did similar studies, for instance, in the pasture modeling, and the polycrop or polypasture model that has been properly set up also for pasture provided a similarly efficient situation, which is very good capability of representing the line. Also, another thing that can be mapped, very interesting, is in time, as you can see here, along a certain period, the P plus I, which is precipitation plus irrigation, which is the amount of water which reaches the soil. And as you can see here, there are jumps. These jumps here represent the moment when irrigation was pursued by the farmer. And the idea is that when the farmer pursues irrigation at a certain time, well, some irrigation may be lost in terms of overland flow, superficial runoff. So ideally, the amount of water that you give to the soil would be just enough in order to fill the soil, but to avoid overland flow. Because overland flow is basically water, I wouldn't say wasted, but anyway, leaving the surface and flowing into channels, ditches, etc. Okay. As you can see here, in fact, this is QS plus QG, which is the sum of the surface flow and the ground flow. Clearly, at the moment when you irrigate, you have to look it upside down. At the moment when you irrigate, that is when you put water artificially, you also have a lot of surface flow here. So in a sense, this is not a waste of water, but let's say an overuse of water. Okay. What is also interesting here, as you can see, for instance, in these charts, you can calculate the ratio between which we call WF star. WF would be water footprint. Water footprint, well, is just another way to call evaporation. Okay. Then they divide between green water footprint and blue water footprint, and green is basically the rainfall and blue is basically the irrigation. Okay, so here, for instance, in this chart, top left, you can see the water footprint, which is the water used for agriculture in green, which is the green tones here, and in blue, which is the blue shades here. P is the precipitation. Well, clearly from these maps with the year 2010, 2011, 2012, you see clearly that precipitation is equal to water footprint green for every situation, which is Polycrop model, CropSys model, and observations. How do we calculate observation water footprint? We calculate soil moisture. Soil moisture increases when you have precipitation, and you can calculate the ratio between increase of soil moisture and precipitation. Basically, precipitation is used 100%. Okay, so whatever precipitation falls over the ground, this is totally used. And you can see the absolute value is in the order of 300 millimeters per year. It means that on 1 year, on average, you can have 250 to 300 millimeters of precipitation, of course, during the growth season. We are talking about the maize growth season, okay? In 1 year, you would have more or less 1,000 millimeters of precipitation, but during the growth season would be 250, 300. However, in order to have proper growth of the cereal, each of the three situation, which is polycrop, CropSys, and the observation, provide a further use of water, which is the water footprint blue. And this is slightly different depending on the way this is calculated, because basically you do the difference between what is infiltrating into the soil, so soil moisture minus overland flow. But however, we have a number in the order of, again, 250 or something. What do I mean with this? I mean that in 1 year, normally you would need 300 millimeters of precipitation, but you still need a lot of blue water footprint, which is irrigation, to compensate for lacking water. And the total of the two would be in the order of 500 or 600 millimeters. And those years when you have less rain, of course, you have more blue water. So irrigation must compensate for lacking water, and the total amount of water used is more or less the same. Okay, so clearly the bring home message here is that maize would not grow in this place only with rainfall, but you need a certain amount of water from irrigation to compensate. Okay, so in a sense, maize is not a sustainable crop here, because it would not grow spontaneously, okay, only with precipitation. What you see here, WF star, is the ratio between the amount of water used in kilograms and the corresponding amount of final product, which is the ratio between kilograms of water and kilograms of dry maize. Dry meaning after it has been harvested and dried out. Okay, so basically for every kilogram of maize, you need more or less 250 kilograms of water from rainfall and 150 or so kilograms of water for irrigation. And in some years, even 400 kilograms of water per irrigation. Okay, so you know already, but I'm stressing this, water basically means, irrigation basically means use of water, use of large amount of water per kilogram of final products. What is called here WFP is the ratio between the water footprint and the local rainfall. So the total water footprint, which is blue plus green, in some cases may be 300% of the local rainfall. Okay, so in some cases you need 3 times as much the water for a cropping maize than the local precipitation. So if precipitation would be 1, you need 3 units. 1 unit, you would need 3 units water locally. Okay. Well, this is the same thing for the what we call the Persico Dosimo case, which is a case which is a situation nearby. And again, here we made a simulation for 10 years, and here you have mapped the green water and the blue water correspondingly. The interesting thing is that if you analyze a long series, a long-term series, or at least 10 years of data, there are years with a certain amount of precipitation, like year 2002 here, and you're lucky enough because you need very little irrigation water, okay? So the message is clear. Only in some year you come up with a lot of water, and then you're lucky because you have a lot of precipitation locally, and then you can use little irrigation. But in most of the cases, you need a lot of irrigation more, okay? Then we used scenarios, in this case from the assessment report number 4, and these scenarios are called A2, B1, and A1B, and A2 is business as usual, while B1 here, it's global environmental, which means a very large effort for mitigation, let's say. And under these scenarios, again from different models, we use different models, and these are the CSAYN, which is a model made in Boulder, Colorado, and ACAM5, and this is made in Hamburg by the Max Planck Center for Atmospheric Research. Well, first of all, let's look at the yield of maize. The yield of maize over the 12 years that we modeled in Persico Dosimo, sorry, in the 10 years we modeled in Persico Dosimo, was 12 tons per year. See, this purple line here. However, at half century, that is 2045, 2054, that is the average over 10 years at the end of the century, at half century, with the different models, CSAYN, A1B, A2, etc., which is from most pessimistic, A2, to most optimistic, and most optimistic would be B1. What would happen, basically? In the pessimistic case, the maize yield would not reach 9 tons per hectare. The two scenarios, blue and yellow, are slightly different, but for now, let's skip on it. However, they are very similar. The blue scenario with automatic irrigation, and the yellow scenario is with manual irrigation. But this is a technical detail. The main bring-home message is that you have scenarios where the deliver or the final harvest would be, the final yield would be much lower than now. Okay. Also, some scenario would have an higher deliver. Okay, but most of the scenario provide much lower. Okay. Here in this map, you have for different models and different scenarios the corresponding water footprint green and water footprint blue. What you bring home from these maps here is that the water footprint green, which is this green bar here, change a lot. The control scenario, which is the present scenario, which we call CO here, both in automatic and manual, but never mind, has this amount of water footprint green, which is 220 millimeter. It means that on average, on the Livraga, sorry, on the Persico Dosimo station, there is a precipitation of 220 millimeters. And the blue water footprint, which is this amount of water here, is to compensate, to allow crop growth, reaching 600 millimeter. So 200 something millimeter precipitation, 600 millimeter total water used. However, there are some scenarios, let alone the lock, which is not important. But for instance, see this CSAYN-A2, okay, which is one of the most pessimistic scenario. You have a precipitation on average of less than 100 millimeter. So some scenario of climate change not only provide increased temperature for sure, but they also provide largely decreased precipitation. And precipitation is green water footprint. And to compensate for low water footprint green, you need to put a lot of blue water footprint. Okay, so every time you have low precipitation, you come up with high water footprint blue. Here you see the different scenarios compared on average with the control scenario, which is present situation. Normally during the growth season, you have 320 millimeters of water. Lock, let alone lock scenario, never mind, but CCSM3 has 187 and ECAM5 has 233. So in future scenarios under the assessment report number 4, so they are a bit up to date, but still of interest, you would have at the half century visibly decreased precipitation in the Po Valley, so a lot of need of blue water for compensation. And this is very, very interesting. I think it's the last chart I'm showing you, that if you look at the water footprint green per kilogram, so kilogram of water per kilogram of product, the present situation now is 200, and the future situation is much lower in all the scenarios. Is this a good news? No, it's not a good news. It means that to produce 1 kilogram of maize, now you use 200 kilogram of rainfall. In the future, in some cases, you may use 100 or maybe 70 kilogram of rainfall. This is not a good news because, of course, the remaining water for cropping comes from irrigation. So you must take water from rivers or aquifers. And in fact, if you look at the right chart here, to compensate for less green water, you need a lot of blue water more. Okay. And again, here, if you look at the same chart for water footprint green divided by rainfall, so water footprint green and blue divided by rainfall, green water is 100%, so you use all of the rainfall, but blue water becomes much higher. And under some scenarios, blue water can reach 600% minus 100% would be 500% of precipitation. So under some scenarios at the half century, if you need 600 millimeter per year to crop your maize, 100 may come from precipitation and 500 will come from irrigation. Well, I think I stressed you enough, but I want to show you one last picture. This picture here represents a link with the hydrology of the mountain. So this is the Po Valley here, and all of these rivers that you see colored here are rivers watering the Po Valley. Well, we have studied the last 1 century or so of water availability in these rivers, and especially during summer, July, August, September, which is the most important period for agriculture. Also spring is important, but summer is more important because lack of water during summer may be very critical. And we have discovered what is represented by this grayish or yellowish color. Particularly, this means that in the last 100 years or so, the amount of water available from these rivers expressed as per cubic meter per second over 1 square kilometer and then multiplied by a scale factor, but never mind. If you take cubic meter per second over square kilometer, this number is decreasing in the last 1 century at the rate ranging between minus 8.4 to circa minus 3 or 4, which is the bluish color, the greenish color here. So what is the linkage here? The main message. We will need more water in the future for cropping, more irrigation because of climate change, but because of climate change, from the rivers of the Alps, we will have a decreasing amount of water available. Very recent newspaper article, I'm too bad it's in Italian, but I will explain you very quickly. This is a picture from winter 2090. In winter 2090, people from this newspaper, which is the Corriere della Sera, very important newspaper in Italy, called me and we went together to see this sections of the Po River. And we verified that the Po River at that time was very, very low. And this was a February or March 2019. And it's written here with the drone over the thirsty Po River. The water is low to 40 centimeters. That is, it's a very, very low water available. Here in this chart, it is represented that at one specific date, which was 28th of February of that year, only 10% of the yearly amount of water necessary was has fallen, basically, which is more or less half of the amount of water in February, which is the orange line compared to the blue line. Well, if you would open now, today, the Corriere della Sera journal in 2022, which is 3 years later, you will see exactly the same pictures, provided that the Po water level is even lower and the amount of water fallen would not be 10%, but would be maybe 5%. Because in this winter, we have seen one of the worst droughts ever. In some places, until now, which is the end of March, only 20% of the precipitation for the season has fallen. So compared to the normal precipitation between January and March, only 20% has been seen. Well, never mind the conclusion, which we have stressed already. We need to study effects of climate change in agriculture. We need to verify strategies for adaptation. The model I am proposing here, Polycrop, CropSys, whatever model, can be used to test adaptation. Adaptation can be tested using different cultivars with different degree days, changes in the amount of water delivered with different methods, which is you can use flooding system, especially for rice, but you can also use a drop irrigation or high pressure irrigation or any type of different irrigation. You can change sowing date and harvest date, etc. So many types of adaptation strategies can be imagined, and they can all be tested, or many of them can be tested using such models. Here, as I told you, you can find some reference paper, but again, if you Google my name and surname online, or if you go on ResearchGate, I think you all know ResearchGate, no? Is this website here where, well, if you Google Daniele Bocchiola, you can find basically everything scientific-wise recently. You can look for contributions, etc. And so you can have an idea of what we do and our work in the field of hydrology and agriculture. Okay, I think I'm finished. And well, of course, with this, the final bring-home message would be "Niet vojne," which is no to the war. I studied Russian, so I speak Russian, and I have a keen interest for Russian culture, etc. And I'm very sad that all of this is happening in reality. So I hope it finishes soon. I have friends in Russia also, which I talk to daily, and they are also very sad about that. Okay.
Thank you very much, Daniele, also for this last moment for reflection and call for peace. That it's very important, and we all are hoping that this tragic moment will finish. Thank you very much, really, from the heart.
Okay, are there any further comments, or everybody's very tired?
No, I think that you have done the explanation very catching, so interesting. So I think that it was a pleasure to follow you. At least from my side, I appreciate.
Yeah, I've seen. Well, Sakina left email. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, also Sakina was saying that was well understood. Okay, let's give the space for one last round of interaction. So if there are questions or comments, also, if you want also to share your experience, I didn't tell before, but also knowing your experience in, I don't know, climate change issues and so on, could be a nice interaction in this webinar that is scientific, of course, but it's inside the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network. So.
Well, I think, for instance, it could be of interest to maybe try and set up some experiments like the one I showed here in Livraga, for instance. We do a lot of experiments with water flow fluxes, with agriculture, etc. I mean, it could be of interest to set up some experiments maybe in different countries or cooperate on such. Be an interest. We have good friends and colleagues also here in University of Milano in the field of agronomy that I think would be keen to participate. So.
Yeah, I think it's a very good idea. Okay. I don't know if there are any questions. Let's take the last chance to interact with Daniele. Of course, we will exchange contacts and so on, so we will keep in touch with him. But
you plan to have other such webinars with the CSAYN?
Yeah, actually, I just announced, because today we agreed on the date. For the 29th of April, we will have like a talk with Soul Food Forest Farm that they are implementing agroforestry in Milan, in Vettabbia. I don't know if you know them, Daniele. Yeah. We also collaborate strongly with them.
Who is this person? Who is the person?
He's called Giuseppe. I don't remember the name, but we are very in touch with Alessandro Di Donna.
Alessandro Di Donna, of course.
Yeah.
But, well, they have this small farm very close to where I live. It's the Cascina Sant'Ambrogio.
Yeah, exactly. He started.
I'm very close. I'm very close to them.
Yeah. They started there with the first experiment of food forest in Milan, and they expand also in Vettabbia. And I think that someone is coming for the last. Yeah, just to anticipate a little bit for the audience, this group, the Soul Food Forest Farm, in which we also collaborate as Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network Italy, is working on reforest with agroforestry technique and successional agroforestry, like 10 hectares of land in the outer part of Milan, like in the periphery in a way.
South of Milan.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like engaging also the communities in doing that. They are making collective planting. It's a very interesting experiment also they're running there. Okay, so if there are no other intervention, we can greatly thank Daniele for the amazing talk.
Thank you for this very interesting experience and occasion.
So let's keep in touch, and also let's exchange and bridge connections. And thank you very much to all, and see you to the next one.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you too.